Hi, I'm Stephen Hicks here at Rockford College. My guest today is Jeffrey Van Davis. Van Davis is a documentary filmmaker, and he's recently released a film on Heidegger and Heidegger's connection with National Socialism in Germany in the 20s, 30s, and beyond. The title of the documentary is Only a God Can Save Us, and that comes from an interview Heidegger did when he was older, long after World War II was over, and he was in a somewhat despairing mood about the future of Germany and the broader world culture. Fascinating set of issues here about Heidegger, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, whether one agrees with him or not. And at the same time, on the history side of things, the Nazis are notorious, and justly so, for the horrors that they perpetrated in World War II. So let me ask you, Jeffrey, how you came to make this film in the first place.
Well, as everybody says, it's a long story, but I'll make it short.
Okay.
When I was a young man, I was a serious young man at one time, and I was raised a Catholic, and I wanted to be a priest.
Huh.
So I went to study for the priesthood, and I was in a seminary for 2 years. And when I was in the seminary, we had two majors, which was theology and philosophy. And it was in a philosophy course that I first learned about Heidegger. And that was the spark that then led me to, after I left the seminary, realize that the priesthood was not for me. And then I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree in philosophy and started reading Heidegger quite serious. I was considered myself a Heideggerian at the time.
At this point, there are some biographical similarities here. Heidegger was initially a Catholic and went to seminary, and of course went on in philosophy as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife kept saying the same thing. I never really thought about that much, and then it dawned on me. But
well, what drew you to Heidegger in particular, of the many philosophers out there, when you were younger?
Yeah, well, actually, I really was interested in existential philosophy from Jean-Paul Sartre, and if you read his major works, you learn that he was greatly influenced by Heidegger. So through Sartre, I went back to Heidegger. But I'll never forget, I was in a class, I was maybe 19 years old or 20. And this priest philosopher, professor, was talking about Heidegger, and he made this comment, and it was one of those things that just caught me and stayed with me, and that was, he was talking about existence and being. He says, it's not so much why something is, where it is, why it is, how it is, but rather what is its isness. And at the age of 19 or 20, I thought, wow, what a powerful insight. And that was it. In fact, 30 years later, that line is the center of a script that I wrote, a feature film script about Heidegger. And it's all centers on this idea of what is isness. At that time, I thought it was extremely profound. Now I'm, more jaded. So,
a little bit more about your career. I know you did undergraduate in California and a master's degree back here in Illinois, and then went to Germany for further study.
Yeah.
Where in Germany were you studying? And was that also in philosophy?
Yeah, I was at the Ludwig Maximilian Universität München, which is known as the University of Munich. And I was in officially the political science department, but I was studying political science and philosophy and cultural history. In the German system, you have a major subject and you have two minor subjects working towards your doctorate. And so, I was reading Rawls. I was reading, most of the European philosophers. I read a lot of Kant and Hegel and Schopenhauer and things like that.
At the same time, or shortly after doing your graduate work in philosophy in Germany, you were interested in film issues and parlayed that into a career doing documentary-type films, I understand, in Germany?
Yeah, I think, as I explained before, my professor who guides you through the doctoral process is called the Doctor Father, and he tragically died, and at that same time I was friends with a German filmmaker, and we formed a film company together and started making short films. And I was so fascinated with the process of filmmaking. I'd always been interested in film studies and film theory, and film as an art form, but here was a chance for me to actually practice it. And once that happened, I was given an opportunity to go back and continue with my doctoral studies, but I'd got the bug, and that was it.
Yeah. All right, so you have your interest in Heideggerian philosophy, and certainly your interest in political philosophy, and no doubt political practice as well, comes together with your filmmaking, and hence Only a God Can Save Us, the documentary, is a natural right for you.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Heidegger in the 20s. By the time we get to Heidegger in the 20s, how old is he? Pushing 40, 50 or so?
Yeah, he first met Hannah Arendt in 1924 when he had a professorship at Marburg University, and he was 37 at that time. Okay. And in the realm of things, he was relatively old for getting a professorship. He wanted to get the chair at Freiburg University, but was denied it, and was kind of resentful because of that. That was a chair in Catholic philosophy. Then he left and took a position at Marburg, and it's during this time that he became more and more interested in Protestant thought, Protestant theology. In fact, the people at Marburg thought he was a Protestant. Marburg, in the northern part of Germany, is a well-known bastion of Protestantism in Germany, whereas Freiburg is in the southern Baden-Württemberg area, which is like 99% Catholic.
Right. So in the middle part of the 20s, Heidegger is working on Being and Time. That's
Yes.
published in 27.
27, yeah.
How would you characterize Heidegger's reputation then in the broader world of German philosophy then by the mid to late 1920s?
Well, it's interesting. Heidegger did not publish anything. In fact, in a long 6-hour interview I had with his son Hermann Heidegger, he made it quite clear to me that one of the reasons why Being and Time came into existence was because Heidegger was at a certain level and he needed to publish to make more money. And he was reluctant to do that because he was doing so many other things. And finally, he threw these things together. I'm saying that figuratively. And he published Being and Time in 1927. And that, of course, overnight he became a philosophical sensation. But by the late 20s, early 30s, he was probably the most well-known, famous philosopher in Germany, as well as being highly respected. What's interesting is before he published Being and Time, he still had this reputation among students. Students came from all over to listen to the magician of Meßkirch. He had this wonderful reputation of being a great teacher, a great lecturer. He would expound upon a particular topic and deconstruct it, tear it apart, and then rebuild it again. And he would just leave the students, in wonderment, so to speak. And this reputation drew people like Hannah Arendt, who came from East Prussia. She was born in Hanover, but her family eventually were in far eastern Germany, and she came all the way down to Marburg, as did many other students, to study under Heidegger. He had this sort of reputation that was unofficial, but students knew.
So by the time we get to the late 1920s, early 1930s, Heidegger is a major star, so to speak, in the philosophical firmament. If we go back to the 20s then again, Heidegger as a political thinker, to what extent do you think his political views were formed or still being shaped in the 1920s?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's partly in debate. But I think we have to understand that, first of all, Heidegger grew up in a small village, a very conservative, traditional way of thinking, lifestyle. Even though he was a very strict, traditional Catholic, and he was informed by being raised this kind of Catholic, eventually he would reject Catholicism, but he still grew up in an area which was highly identifiable in terms of being nationalistic, patriotic, all things German, but being a right-wing Catholic, or I don't want to say a right-wing Catholic, but a very conservative, traditional, very arch-traditional conservative Catholic, didn't lead him to Nazism, but it did create a way of thinking, I think, or a way of looking at the world that He was definitely not cosmopolitan, definitely not multiculti. When Heidegger said, Die Sprache ist das Haus des Seins, language is the house of being, if you investigate it a little further, he really means especially the German language. He was a brilliant man. He knew, as a young man at the university, he knew Latin and Greek inside and out, the classic education. And for him, there were two great sources. One was German, and the other one was Greek. And for him, that was the only way.
Would you say in the 1920s there's any sense that, aside from the cultural conservatism, right, so to speak, including the nationalism, that there are other elements of Nazi political philosophy that Heidegger signed on to in the 20s, even at a theoretical level?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like osmosis through a semi-permeable membrane. When you grow up in a certain culture, you adapt or automatically accept certain concepts or ideas, and these were very strong. We know that at that time, since the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, there were some key German writers who were talking about race, talking about German culture and German language being superior, that, Germany was the land of Dichter and Denker, of poets and thinkers, and Heidegger certainly belonged to that class of people.
Would you include Oswald Spengler in this group?
Yes.
Or Moira van den Broek in this
Absolutely.
group?
As a matter of fact, it's good that you brought that up. Heidegger read Spengler, knew him in and out. He read people like Ernst Junger. Junger was a friend, even. This very arch conservative, politically conservative, almost xenophobic, what some people would consider to be this arrogance of German culture, which really is an outward manifestation of extreme low self-esteem. I don't know, that's a too modern term, but Germany came to nation statehood very late in the history of Europe. They even tried for a while colonization in West Africa, which was a terrible failure. And so they were sort of the Johnny-come-latelys in the European political scene. I mean, who was it? Frederick the Great, that said that he only spoke German to his horse. Otherwise, the people at the Hof, the people in the court, spoke French.